Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to try something a little different. We're going to look at the world through a brand new set of lenses. We're going to explore 14 really powerful concepts that help uncover the hidden, often invisible legacies of colonialism. And believe me, these legacies can shape everything from the history you were taught in school to the beauty standards you see online. You ready to see things a little differently? All right, let's dive in.
I mean, think about it for a second. It's a weird feeling, right? That sense that the rule book for what's considered beautiful or smart or even proper was written by somebody else, from somewhere else. That little nagging feeling, that is exactly what we're going to dissect today.
So, where do we even begin with something this big? Well, we start with the story. The very first step to understanding the lasting impact of colonialism is to ask a simple question. Who's holding the pen? Who gets to write the history books? Because the stories we're told about the past, they don't just stay in the past. They completely shape our present.
Just let that sink in. A textbook, a source of what's supposed to be objective truth for students, paints this glowing, heroic picture of one group, while a violent, traumatic, and absolutely pivotal event for another group is just gone, wiped from the page. Now, you gotta ask yourself, is that just an oversight, an accident? No way. That's a choice.
And that choice has a name. It's called the Erasure of History. It's not just about forgetting. It's the intentional, calculated act of silencing parts of the past. It's when uncomfortable truths like brutal massacres or the fact that local cultures had their own sophisticated societies and writing systems are strategically removed from the official narrative. And why? Well, the goal is pretty clear: to make the whole colonial project look like a clean, heroic, and even necessary chapter in history.
Okay, so this slide here is like a detective's toolkit for spotting this in the real world. Let's break it down. The simple meaning is exactly what it sounds like: hiding or straight up deleting history. The keyword clues to listen for are things like missing stories or forgotten heroes. Whenever you hear phrases like that, it's a huge hint that a big piece of the puzzle has been deliberately taken out. And the example here is so powerful: a textbook that raves about the benefits of American education while completely ignoring the horrific Samar or Budajo massacres. It's a stark reminder that sometimes what isn't said is the most important part of the story. The silence is deafening.
Now, this is a little different from a related idea called collective amnesia. The distinction is subtle but really important. If Erasure of History is an institution, like a government or a publisher, deliberately shredding a file, collective amnesia is when the entire society just kind of mutually agrees to forget what was in that file. It's this widespread cultural habit of skipping over the painful, traumatic parts of history and instead romanticizing the colonial era. One is a deliberate cover-up. The other is a society-wide case of selective memory.
And that leads us to this. You've probably heard this before, right? Maybe from an older relative, or you've seen it pop up in online comments. This idea that things were somehow better back then, or that people were more disciplined during colonial times. It's this strange sense of fondness for what was, by all accounts, a really painful and oppressive era. So what's actually going on there?
Well, that's what we call colonial nostalgia. It's the act of looking back at a period of foreign occupation through these really thick, rose-tinted glasses. It's a masterclass in selective memory. It remembers the supposed perks, like new bridges or trains or a certain kind of order, while conveniently forgetting the violence, the oppression, the loss of freedom, and the cultural destruction that came with it. It's a longing for a past that never really existed, a simplified, sanitized version of it.
So, where did this idea even come from? A huge part of the answer lies in the original marketing pitch for colonialism itself, this concept of the white man's burden. This was the belief, made famous by people like Rudyard Kipling, that Western powers had a moral obligation, a duty to go out and civilize the rest of the world. It was an incredibly powerful piece of framing. It turned an act of conquest and resource extraction into a selfless, charitable mission to uplift people they called backward. It's the ultimate justification, turning domination into a noble act.
Okay, so let's build on that. Once you've rewritten the past, the next logical step is to control how people are seen in the present. This next section is all about the power of the gaze, that is, the perspective of the person in power, and how that single point of view can define, categorize, and ultimately control everything and everyone it looks at.
And this gaze actually works in two very distinct ways. First, as we see here, you've got the imperial eye. This gaze is pointed at the land. It sees a new territory as this exotic, untouched, virgin paradise. It's a landscape that's empty, wild, and just waiting to be discovered and claimed. Then you have the colonial gaze, and this one is directed at the people.
This gaze looks down on the native inhabitants as primitive, savage, maybe even childlike or backward. They're seen as objects to be studied or fixed or improved, but never ever as equals. So one gaze romanticizes the scenery while the other dehumanizes the people who live there.
This brings us to a really crucial turn in our story, where we have to look inward. Because when an entire society is told a certain story about its past and is looked at through a certain lens for generations, well, those external pressures, they don't just stay outside. They start to create an echo inside. They begin to fundamentally change how people see themselves.
And this is where things can get really personal and maybe a little uncomfortable. Why is it that in so many places around the world, speaking English is automatically seen as smarter or more educated? Or what about that quiet underlying assumption that Western products, Western ideas, Western movies or lifestyles are just inherently better? This isn't just about personal taste. It's a deep-seated value judgment that puts one culture on a pedestal high above another.
This whole phenomenon has a name. It's called internalized colonialism, and it's one of the most profound psychological impacts we're talking about today. It's what happens when the colonized people begin to accept and then actually believe the colonizer's negative story about them. It's when you start to adopt the mindset that your own culture, your own language, even the way you look, is somehow second-rate or inferior when compared to a dominant, usually Western standard.
And you can see this pop up everywhere in daily life. It can manifest as a subtle, maybe even unconscious feeling of shame about your own cultural heritage. It's the powerful preference for speaking English over local languages in business or school because it's seen as more professional. It absolutely drives beauty standards that say lighter skin is more desirable. And in our world today, you see it all over social media, with influencers who celebrate this generic American lifestyle while treating their own local foods and customs as a joke or something backward.
So you might be asking, how does this internalized view get so widespread? Well, the answer is a concept called cultural hegemony. Think of it like this. It's what happens when one culture's worldview, usually Western, becomes so dominant in all the big institutions, schools, media, government, business, that its way of doing things isn't seen as a choice anymore. It just becomes the normal way. It becomes the default setting for an entire society. And this table here helps us spot it in the wild. The meaning, like we said, is when Western norms become the yardstick for everything. The key words to look for are things like English-only policies in workplaces, or when people appeal to these vague international or Western standards to justify a decision. And the examples are everywhere. Universities that demand theses be written only in English, which automatically devalues local languages and knowledge systems. Or just look at advertising, with the endless parade of fair-skinned models that defines beauty for millions. It's all about an external culture setting the rules of the game for everyone else.
A related behavior you see is something called mimicry. This is the conscious or sometimes subconscious act of imitating the colonizer. It could be their accent, their fashion, their social manners. The example here of students putting on an American accent just for a class presentation is perfect. And this is a really complex act. On one hand, it can be a tool for survival, right? A way to fit in and access power, but it can also be a sign of admiration, which really blurs the line between trying to get by and wanting to be like them. But, and this is so important, this story does not end with domination and internalization. Not at all. Our final section is all about the path forward. It's about how cultures push back, how they adapt, and ultimately how they begin the powerful work of reclaiming their own stories.
First, though, we have to understand that these power dynamics didn't just vanish when countries gained independence. That's where this term Neo-colonialism comes in. It's the new colonialism. It describes the modern reality where a country can be politically independent on paper, but in reality, it's still heavily controlled by foreign powers. This happens through things like economic debt, unfair trade deals, a foreign military presence, or just the sheer dominance of foreign movies, music, and media. The flags might have changed, but those unequal power structures can be just as strong as ever.
But here's the thing. Culture is incredibly tough. It's resilient. It rarely gets totally wiped out. Instead, it adapts, it absorbs, it blends. This process is called hybridity, the creative, messy, beautiful mixing of cultures. It's what happens when colonial influences and native traditions smash together and create something totally new and unique. The example on the slide is just perfect. A local town fiesta that has both a Catholic Mass and ancient, pre-colonial indigenous rituals happening together. It's not one culture replacing the other. It's the birth of something entirely new in the space between them. And this brings us to a final, really empowering idea, the Decolonial Turn. Now, this isn't just a theory. It's an active, conscious movement to reclaim everything that was lost, devalued, or suppressed. This slide lays out a pretty clear path forward. Step 1. Revive languages and scripts.
This means people actively teaching and using their native languages, like in Bebe and workshops, to reconnect with their ancestors. Step 2. Reclaim traditions. This is about bringing back and celebrating local customs with pride, which you see in the growing movement of people wearing locally woven textiles. And finally, Step 3, which brings us right back to where we started, rewrite histories. This is the absolutely crucial work of challenging those old colonial narratives in our schools and telling our own stories from our own point of view.
So, we've just unpacked 14 really powerful concepts. But these are so much more than just academic terms. They're lenses. They're tools that help us see the invisible forces that have shaped our histories, our cultures, and maybe even our own identities. So the final question isn't really about the past at all. It's about the future. Now that you have these lenses to see the world and your place in it more clearly, how does that change the future you want to help build?